been going through a series called Separate. What does it mean to live separate, and what does it mean to live separated? And we've been going through that in 1 Peter, and today we're going to talk about that some more. If you got a Bible, open it up to 1 Peter chapter 4. I call this is not the best title in the world, but it fits today. What to do when it gets real bad, right? Keep it simple, right? No reason. I love what Warren Wiersbe, one of the most famous theologians that's ever walked in America. He said something one time that I never forgot as a pastor and preacher. Wrote tons of commentaries. Many of you have probably read Warren Wiersbe's stuff over the years. He said, somebody asked him as he got in his 70s what he would say to any young pastor and preacher. He said, give up trying to be profound. Give up trying to be profound. Just be simple and keep it there. What to do when it gets real bad. Here we go. 1 Peter. This whole book, if you remember, the context is, before we read this, the context is, these are a people who are dispersed and under duress. The first verse of the entire letter, I mention it every week, and that's on purpose. The first verse of the letter says to people who are aliens, and it goes on to say aliens and strangers. We are people these were a group of people, Christians, new Christians, that were now living in hostile territory, spiritually hostile territory. They were under duress. And so Peter gives them some instructions, 1 Peter 4:7. The end of all things is near, therefore be of sound judgment and sober spirit for the purpose of prayer. Above all, keep fervent in your love for one another, because love covers a multitude of sins. Be hospitable to one another without complaint. There it is. So now I want you to think, we're going to kind of play off the irony of this. This is a situation in a country. It's a situation in a land with real people who are real moms and dads. They have real jobs. They have the same concerns about retirement that you have. They have the same concerns about their money that you have. They have aging parents. They're parents of little bitties. They're teachers. They're bankers. They're single moms. They're students. They're people just like us. And yet they're going through a very hostile time for their faith. So Peter says into this, he says the end is near. In other words, the coming of the Lord is on its way. So let me ask you, in that type of climate, the thing that stands out to me is, why would he talk about loving one another? Why? I mean, don't you think, if I had written first, if it was first Jason, right? It would have been a whole bunch of principles to remember about how to not back down and how to face a politically hostile climate. It would have looked probably, honestly, a whole lot different than that. But that's why he's Peter and I'm Jason, right? So what would make this such a reality for today's world? What to do when it all gets bad? He turns to loving one another. And I'm going to do two things this morning. One, I'm going to give you one truth, and then I'm going to come behind that and give you one principle based out of this passage that we can remember in times. Because let me tell you something, friends. I don't know if you're paying attention, but I'm sure you are. That culture is getting more aggressive all the time. There's a term in economics with the economy. There's four stages of the economy. That we are increasing at an increasing rate. We're growing and getting faster. We're increasing at a decreasing rate, meaning that maybe your profit and loss, or however your country or your company is doing, we're increasing, but it's slower than it was in the past. Then there is decreasing at a decreasing rate. It's getting worse, but it's not as bad as it used to be. And then there's decreasing at an increasing rate. That's America, morally. Now, that's no shock. We live in a culture, I can't believe, just in the last 10 to 12 years, how much more hostile spiritually our country has become. That should be of no shock to us. Peter, I even addressed that. He even addressed that. Don't let it be a shock to you. So in that type of world, why would he point to this? Well, I'm going to give you one truth. Number one, govern my life by the standards that exist in eternity. I think that's what Peter's telling us right here. Govern my life by the standards that exist in eternity. If you stop for a second and you think about how much we govern, what are the things that govern your life? Well, I don't know. Maybe they're different for you, and they are different from you. They're different for all of us. What are the things you cherish the most? If you were to make a list of all the things you cherish the most, it would be a good test for all of us to say how many of those things that I actually cherish live in eternity. Right? The things that I value the most, do those things live after this life? And you might be shocked at how some of those times those things don't line up. It's a great exercise. I've actually done it before. So here's why I would say govern your life by the standards that exist in eternity. See, there's an eternal rhythm here. And in that eternal rhythm, he tells us to love one another. And he tells us to be of sober mind and be of sober spirit. In other words, don't panic. Don't panic. Don't panic. You know, it's interesting. Probably in the last, more than 5 years and less than 10. In the last decade of my life, I have noticed as a casual observer, the word anxiety, I don't go a day of my life without hearing the word anxiety on the radio, on the television, on a YouTube ad from somebody. Anxiety now has become a cultural norm. And maybe that's because we finally found a word to put on it. Let me tell you something, friends. Anxiety is nothing new. But anxiety, and one of the things that my heart breaks for the millennial generation and Gen Z, all of our students, I don't know why the devil chose this, but I will tell you, it is different for them than it is for us. It really is. That, if you want to say the 60s were plagued with the sexual revolution, I heard Walter Cronkite, only so few of you know who that name is. Google him, everybody under 35. Walter Cronkite one time said in the 1960s, America plunged headlong into sexual immorality and they never recovered. It's true. Every generation is defined by something. I grew up in the 80s. We were defined Gordon Gekko. Remember Wall Street? Greed is good. There were actually t-shirts that said greed is good. Go make the money, right? My generation was kind of defined by that. Today, the generation that we're seeing emerge in their teens and in their 20s, anxiety has hit them in ways that it never did hit my generation. It's very real. It's very real. So why is that? Everywhere I go. And I wonder this. I wonder if and it's not, I will not just pin that, by the way, on those between 18 and 30. I think anxiety has hit the American population in ways that maybe we've never seen before. And so why is that? Could it be that maybe the reason we are panic-stricken is because our core values only exist in the earthly? Could it be? Could it be that as a culture, it may not be true for you, but it might be. But could it be that as an American culture, the things we chase and the things we long for and the things we strive for, actually in the end, they won't be there? So if the things that we cherish the most don't live in heaven, my question is, why do they rank so high now? Why do they rank so high now? I'm not saying, listen, we have to work, right? You got to work. That's just part of life. We have to work. And work is a good thing, man. Work is a good thing. We're not called to be lazy, but I can tell you this, the older I get, the more I start to cherish eternal rhythms. I am learning, you know what? Work will be there tomorrow and the day after. Maybe I could spend a little more time at Huff's Grocery eating a bologna sandwich with Charlie and talking about things that matter, right? You should go to Huff's Grocery. Best bologna sandwich on planet Earth. I don't care where you live, right? You should go there. And Charlie ain't even paying me to say that. He just happens to sit up front, Don't sit up front. I'll point you out, right? But those things that matter, I'm learning to be more present and to try to love better. I think the purpose of why Peter says that we should, the end of all things is near, verse 7, and to be of sound mind and sound judgment is because when you realize, listen to me, when you realize that the eternal standards of life, when you start ranking them at the top of your priority list, things become very clear. Things become really clear to you. You see, when you have an eternal lens, when you frame up your perspective with eternal things, other things tend not to panic you. That's why I love the World War II generation, right? All the great-grandmothers. I remember, my grandmothers and my great-grandmothers and my grandfathers and my great-grandfathers, they were just level-headed people. You know why? Because, first of all, they were old. And they realized, it'll be all right. It always is. Son, my whole life, every summer, it gets hot. It's going to be that way next year, too. There was a level, you know why? But you know why? Because they went through war. Women made bullets and men shot them. They had been through hard times. Hard times create calm people. And I wonder if and that's one of the things I think as the church that we have got to understand that when we go through hard persecutions, if our eternal values are there, we tend not to freak out so much, right? I think that's why Peter talks about, it's interesting, when you put this against the landscape of a hostile climate, this is a very odd passage to me. The end of all things is near. Be of sound judgment and of sober spirit for the purpose of prayer. The purpose of prayer. He's calling the church to pray when most churches would be strapping on their cleats, putting on their armor, and going to battle with the government. He's saying, no, you should get together and pray. You know what I'm learning at 51 years old and having been in this game for a while now? This is what I'm learning about church life. Prayer, intercession, the stuff we do on First Wednesday, intercession, prayer trumps programming every day of the week. Intercession trumps programming every day of the week. You know why? Because you can have the best programs in the world. And it doesn't matter how big your church gets, how many things you offer to the world. If you don't have the power of the Holy Ghost, it matters not. I'm serious. And that is not, I could not get a publisher to publish that book today. They will not publish that book. They will not publish that book. They've tried. You know why? Nobody buys it. Because they all want to know who's the latest, greatest church architect, structural guru. And I'm here to tell you, friends, for 2,000 years, there's a reason that Jesus, I feel like I'm preaching now, that 2,000 years ago, Jesus put the Holy Ghost in us. You know why? Because prayer and intercession, power comes from that. Power comes from that. Power in your parenting, power in your marriage, power in your money, power in every walk. You could be a walking, powerful man of God, woman of God. In the hardest times there is, you can stand flat-footed and say, thus saith the Lord. You can do that. You can do it if you govern your lives by the standards that matter most. So let's move then. Why does he go to love? Because he says in verse 8, above all things, keep fervent in your love for one another. Verse 8, because love covers a multitude of sins. So why in the world would he say that? In a world of political harshness and all this problems, you got to realize, you guys, you do realize that when he wrote this, they were killing Christians. They were killing Christians. Paul wrote a large majority of the letters to the churches that you read from a prison cell with one hand tied. He had to talk it to the scribe. Tell him this, tell him that, tell him this, tell him that, because I can't write. My hand's tied up to a wall here with a chain. Why could they say that? Why love? I'll tell you why love. And I said it this way, because togetherness becomes fragile under the fire of harassment. Togetherness becomes fragile under the fire of harassment. That's why he's reminding us. Notice who he wrote this to. Did you notice who he wrote this to? He didn't write it to everybody out there. He wrote it to all of us in here. Did you notice that? He didn't write it to common culture. This was written to Christians going under intense targeting for their faith. So he wrote that for us to remember, because togetherness becomes fragile under the fire of harassment. Man, I've seen that play out so many times in my life. You know, people start fighting on the inside. And friends, I'll tell you something. If you want to see an example that every one of us, I don't care, if you're in this room today, you saw this, whether you saw how heavy it was or not. We have no better picture ever of how true that statement is. Togetherness becomes fragile under the fire of harassment. We have no better example ever than what we lived through in 2020 with a thing called COVID. What did the church do during COVID? I'll tell you what we did. We turned on each other. We turned on each other. You may not have. But I'm telling you, as a Christian church in America, all it took was a pandemic to split churches. Every pastor's got these stories, by the way. Every pastor I know, we've all got our war stories. We're going to be 80 and overweight sitting on the courthouse whittling one day, talking about, yeah, I remember when they told me, we all got our stories. I got text messages for that year and a half, often in the same day, telling me how good of a pastor I was, and some telling me how absolutely pathetic of a pastor I was. People texting me that stuff. So the people that texted me how great I was, I told them I love you and I thank you. And the ones that I didn't, I just punched them right in the nose in Jesus' name. And that's how, I just told you that's how I was raised. That's how it works. I'm just told them kidding. But I did block them and delete them and never spoke to them again. I'm kidding about that too. I'm just trying to wake y'all up. All right? But I had people on both ends of the spectrum. But every pastor has that. Why? We turned on each other. Are you vax or you no vax? Did you get the shot? Did you not get the shot? If you're smart, you'll get the shot. If you're stupid, you'll get the shot. When we just turned on each other. And I saw this splitting the body of Christ, and I mean way bigger than ClearView, just the body of Christians going to social media, just hammering. And let me tell you why I bring this up. All it took for the church to become hostile to each other was the possibility of getting sick. I want you to think about that for a second. All it took for the church to become hostile internally was the possibility of getting sick, as if that's never been possible before. Think about that. There were people that woke up during the pandemic and went, I could die. Yeah, that was true last year too. Now look, I'm not saying we should be careless and stupid. I'm not going to go swimming around in a pool of rattlesnakes and cottonmouths. That's called moronic. We had to exercise good judgment. We had to exercise, and we were doing the best we could. Everybody was just doing the best we could. At ClearView, we just kind of went a buffet back then. If you weren't here during those days, we had a venue for mask required. We had a venue for mask if you want to. We had a venue for families only, separated over with tables. And then we covered all the bases. And I still had people texting me, telling me things like, true story, you're not allowing me to worship. Me? Well, you can stay at home and watch. I know I don't want to stay at home. Well, then you can come to any one of our 17 different styles of venues we have. But it didn't matter. It's fascinating that something as simple as the possibility of getting sick could what's going to happen? I don't mean to yell. Well, it's going to come down so I won't. What's going to happen when Williamson County sheriffs and the National Guard come on the premises to say, if you preach Jesus, I'm going to kill all of you? Because that day's coming, people. What's going to happen then? Let me tell you what COVID proved to me. We are not ready. We are not ready. We are absolutely not ready for when it gets real bad. For when it gets real bad. But good thing is it ain't there yet. But you better get ready. Because listen, there's coming a day in the Christian church when COVID and all the stuff it did to the church is going to make that seem like a birthday party compared to what we're about to go through. So the reality is togetherness gets really fragile under the fire of harassment. So I want you to notice what Peter does right here. This is fascinating. This is fascinating. He says, above all, verse 8, keep fervent in your love. So when the context is political, look at what he does. He goes to the relational. Do you see that? When the context is political, he goes to the relational. You know why? Because politics comes and goes. A lot of y'all think if we can just get the right president, our country will be okay. No, it won't. No, it won't. Because that president ain't going to be God. I don't care what party they're from. So when the context was political, he went to love. When the context was about harassment, did you notice what he said in verse 9? Be hospitable to one another. You know what that meant? Literally, open up your home. Feed each other. Let each other stay in your homes. So in a context of harassment, he goes to hospitality. Why? Because those are eternal values. You see how upside down that is? It's upside down because love is a choice. We have to choose to love each other. You can disagree on everything from pandemics to church structure to budgets to what kind of staff we should have or what we should do in the church. You can disagree with all of that. That's okay. If we can learn to live in that kind of hospitality, you know why? Because love is a choice. Love is not an emotion, right? Love is not an emotion. And that's where I think so many of us are misled. We all think that love is an emotion. Love is not an emotion. Love is a choice. It's emotional, but it's still a choice, right? You know what taught me that? Marriage. My wife chooses to love me. It's a good choice. But there's a lot of reasons to unchoose it. I'm not kidding. You know? I've got reasons to unchoose it too. So do you. God never called anybody in a marriage to be the dream giver. There's only one dream giver. And he came out of the grave. The rest of us are fatally flawed. Right? Some of the biggest reasons I think that marriages struggle sometimes is we look to each other to do what only God can do. So I'm not saying you shouldn't have any standards in your marriage, but come on, give your wife a break, man. Give your husband a break. He didn't come out of the grave. Aren't you glad? That didn't get anything. Okay, so you're telling me your husband has Christ syndrome? No. Messianic properties? No, he doesn't. No, we're all fatally flawed. So love is a choice. You know how to prove it to you? Look at 1 Corinthians. Look at this. 1 Corinthians. Look at this verse. Love does not demand its own way. Is that a choice or an emotion? This is where you answer back. It's a choice. Love is not irritable. Choice or emotion? Choice. Love keeps no records of wrong. It doesn't keep score. Oh, amen or oh me. Is that a choice or an emotion? Choice. I choose not to remember the things that I get mad about. That's marriage, man. For all of you thinking about getting married is awesome. But that verse right there, that is real time. I'm going to choose not to remember how I don't like what you did yesterday, and that ain't going to affect dinner today. Right? That's the reality of marriage. Why is he saying that? Because love is what keeps us together. And friends, I will say, I really think, and I'm going to put myself at the top of this list, and I mean that with all my heart. I think sometimes I forget how to love people just for who they are. Not excusing sin, not calling them to higher ground, and you not calling. We need to hold one another accountable to holy living. But we are fatally flawed people. And we need to learn to live under that covenant. Because I think today I heard one of my really good friends who's a psychologist say it this way one time. We judge ourselves by our intentions, and we judge others by their actions. We judge ourselves by our intentions, and we judge others by their actions. I'm a way better person in my mind than I actually am. Love is a choice. Now, why would that matter? Because this is the heart of the gospel. It's the heart of the gospel. The heart of the gospel is that God, aren't you glad that God chose to love you and wasn't emotional about it? I'm super glad that God, in his infinite wisdom and in his perfect fatherhood self, doesn't look at me and go, well, I kind of want to love you, but truthfully, Jason, I know all about you. It's done. It's over. I have nowhere, I can't say anything to that. The beauty of the gospel is that the situation is way less than I ever could have imagined. But the outcome is far better than I could possibly dream. That God chose to love me, and he knows everything about me. See, that's what we're trying to model in the church. That I can be a pastor that you do not fully agree with, or actually even 30% of you, I may do 30% of what you think I should be doing, but you are required by biblical standards to love me and continue to pay me, thus saith the Lord in 1 Jason, right? 1 Jason chapter 4, right? No. I'm never going to meet your standards, and guess what? You're not meeting mine either. I mean that. Like you're not meeting my standards, and I'm not meeting yours. But nowhere in the scriptures does it say, love each other only if you can agree. It says love. Now, why does Peter go to love in a persecution environment? Really simple. Because love is the theological pterodactyl, something you've always heard about but never seen. It is the theological pterodactyl in a world of harassment. Because when everybody starts turning on each other and they start cutting people's heads off and they start killing Christians, and when the world goes crazy and when everything's upside down and right becomes wrong and wrong becomes right and everything gets chaotic, loving one another in here is going to make the whole world go, who are those people? Who are those people? That's why Jesus said this. Jesus said, look in John, go to the next one. By this, all humanity, all men will know you're my disciples if you have love for one another. Not doctrine, not orthodoxy, not the proper theology. They will know you're a disciple if you love each other. And that is why I think Peter goes after this about what to do when it gets hard. Love, in the end, is a billboard. And I'll tell you why. There's coming a day in America when these buildings might be illegal. There's coming a day in America when claiming Christ might get you killed. That's coming. And when those days come, friends, right here in this room, we're all we've got. We're all we've got. All of us. Gray-headed, bald-headed, old, divorced, new, married, single again, tall, short, black, white, Asian. We are all we've got in those moments. And that's how the world's going to know that there is a God, and he does exist, and his name is Jesus. Because we kept it together, and we refused to turn on each other when it got awful.
You know, it means a lot to us that you would come here today and be a part of who we are. It really does matter to us more than you might realize. Sometimes I think we underestimate the power we have to influence people. You know, if you would look around your world, you'd be amazed at how many people would receive what you have to say to them. You could be a digital missionary. You don't have to post everything on Facebook, or we're not asking you to go on your favorite social platform, but I would challenge you to look around your world. I guarantee you might have a friend, even in a different state or another part of the world, something was said today, whether a sermon, a prayer, a song, something was said that could mean a lot to them. Man, send it to them. You'd be amazed at how much of a difference that could make.